And so, and the fun never stops at CTC. So thank you very much for this little break. I would be remiss in my duties as we regather here and come back together. I wanted everyone to know, and those playing the home game, that we're very thrilled that the California Senate yesterday voted to confirm Commissioners Madaffer, Guardino, and Arp for another four-year term of office. Could you join me in a round of applause? Thank you. We get to keep our brain trust here, so thank you very much. We don't know the vote count, but I'm. Was it unanimous? Okay. Well, okay.
3 people showed up. It was 3-0.
3-0. Excellent. Very, very good. All right. So now moving on to our agenda, I believe Laurel and Stephen are back up here on item number 18, approval of the revised 2016 STIP fund estimate, assumptions for the price-based excise tax rate. Laurel, you want to just let Stephen go?
Well, let me just say that this is an action item, and we will be making a recommendation at the end.
Very good. Thank you.
So, good afternoon again, Chair and Commissioners. Stephen Keck with Caltrans. My last presentation was the good news presentation. This one is the presentation that really goes over revised assumptions for the 2016 fund estimate so that the Commission may adopt an amended STIP fund estimate if they choose to do so. And this is based on a presentation that I gave in December, where we're looking forward at the possible price-based excise taxes that might go into effect next year and the years after, because gas prices are really, really low. In fact, I saw today that West Texas Intermediate, which is baseline crude oil, prices are $27 and change, which is, for those, 26? Wow, that's even lower. This, for those of you who follow, is extremely low. And I didn't even bother to go back and see how many years it's been since we've been to this level, but it's really tremendous. So as we look forward, we're really looking at low gas prices for quite some time. So we approved the assumptions for the adopted fund estimate way back in May of 2015. And I've gone over this at the December meeting about when we made these decisions and what the prices of gas were like at the time. And the adopted assumptions for the existing fund estimate were reasonable at the time. As I mentioned earlier, the governor did release his budget for 2016-17, and the estimate for the price-based excise tax included in that budget for next year is 9.8 cents per gallon. That's even less than the 10 cents that we talked about at the last commission meeting. And I should note that that is just the estimate of what we think the Board of Equalization might do when they adopt a new rate next month or by March 1st. I have talked to some staff over there, and they indicated that the finance number may have even been higher than some numbers they were looking at in November. So I don't know what they're going to do, but it certainly is in the ballpark of 10 cents or less. So this is a comparison of the already dismal 12-cent per gallon price-based excise tax and the 9.8 cent per gallon estimate for next year. Again, this is a chart that is similar to one we presented last month. And what we're looking at is a $300 million decrease roughly in taxes collected, which equates to a reduction in STIP funding from $300 million in the current year, which is already lower than what we need, down to $150 million for next year. So you've reduced your revenue in half, again, from levels that really should have been up around $800 million a year. That is borne out by this chart, which is a look since 2010 when we came up with the price-based excise tax. This chart, again, is one that I presented last time. It's really for review purposes. We were up at 18 cents a gallon, right around there for a while. We had 21.5 cents in 13, 14, 12 cents this year, 10 cents or lower next year. So because of the the weight fee swap, then the first portion of the price-based excise tax going to pay for debt service. Really, all the impact from these lower and lower taxes is felt by the STIP and by local agencies that receive 44% of those revenues. So this is really intended as a review and to set the stage for what we were directed to do at the December meeting, and that was to go back, work with your staff to come up with new excise tax rate projections based on current law and what we estimate the price of gas might be over the next 5 years, and to come up with a possible amendment to the fund estimate. So the next slide is actually going to be an animated slide. If you're following along, I understand you all have screens in front of you. You might want to look at the screen instead of the hard copy, because the hard copy has 5 lines on it and it's very difficult to follow in that format. It's like Chart C, but with less lines than Chart C. So what we did is we started with the rates that were included in the adopted fund estimate that was adopted just in August. And these were assumptions, again, that we approved in May of 2015. So that assumed that the rate next year would be 14.1 cents per gallon, which is roughly equivalent to about $3.10 gasoline price. And we assumed that that would increase over time to hit about just under $4 per gallon and 18-cent gas tax rate at the end of the 5-year period. And that is the assumption that powered the existing STIP capacity of almost zero. So this is the assumption that brought us to $54 million capacity in the existing adopted STIP. If we take this same curve and adjust it only for the beginning point of 10 cents per gallon, which is where we are estimating for next year, you get this line. So 10 cents a gallon, again, that 10 cents a gallon is not tied to any particular gas price because of Board of Equalization adjustments for over collection. But 10 cents a gallon is where we're looking at for next year. This curve, again, adjusted for that, would increase to about $2.50 a gallon at 11.8 cents, $2.80 at 12.8 cents, and about $3 a gallon at 13.9 cents, and would stay at that rate. Again, adjusting the curve above only for the starting point. We also looked at the Energy Information Administration's estimate for fuel prices in the future and adjusted those for California prices. The Energy Information Administration is a fantastic place to look at data and projections into the future, but like many economists, they're really reluctant to look at huge swings. So their price forecast for the 5 years moving forward is almost flat at something between $3.20 and $3.30 per gallon over the next 5 years. Which equates to roughly 4.7 to 15 cent per gallon excise tax rate based on the price. And of course, that one also starts at 10 cents a gallon because that is pretty much what we believe the Board of Equalization will do. And finally, we have a forecast here in red from the Department of Finance that shows an almost immediate increase in the excise tax rate up to 17 cents per gallon next year. That equates to about $3.70 gas next year. Everything that we've seen doesn't really point that way. It would be great if that were to happen. It would certainly alleviate a lot of the pressure we see, but almost everything we've seen is showing low oil prices and low gas prices moving out at least 2 years into the future. So we think the Department of Finance scenario is probably a little optimistic in the budget year plus one, which is 2017-18. So finally, we come upon our recommended scenario, which is this orange line, orange being my favorite color, which splits the difference. So really what we're looking at is we have some higher and some lower scenarios. This one has the benefit of two things going for it. One, it splits the difference between the highest and lowest. Two, it's a straight line. And the reason it's a straight line is because it's extremely difficult, and I've said this before, extremely difficult to know what prices are going to be. So a straight line is as good as any other line. Also, this was Will's idea. So it's probably clearly the best of all the 5 options that we looked at. So this is the basis of all of the work that we've done to develop an amended fund estimate for your consideration. It's based on that dotted orange line and the excise taxes that increases to 12, 14, 16, and then 18 cents over the next 5 years. So let's go over the numbers. The adopted fund estimate that we adopted in August projected about $2.6 billion of new revenue available for the STIP period and a target capacity of $2.4 billion. The updated scenario with that orange line and those tax rates generates about $1.8 billion in revenue, which is an $801 million decrease over the fund estimate. So when we convert that into revenue year over year, comparing what's in the adopted fund estimate versus what we get with that orange dotted line, you see again the $801 million decrease over 5 years. The biggest impact, I shouldn't say the biggest impact, the impact is spread almost evenly across all of the years. And that's mostly because we were always assuming an increase over time of the excise tax rate. And as we look at this, you see the net difference is almost flat across all the years. And that's so that straight line that goes up kind of does the same job as the fancy curved lines that we had before. So $801 million in lost revenue equates directly to an $800 million loss in program capacity. And when you add that to the existing capacity from the original fund estimate, you end up with a shortfall of $754 million versus the existing programmed STIP. That is not a good number by any means. We like to see positive numbers. The adopted STIP was more or less 0. This one, if adopted, would mean cancellation of projects, pushing projects out into other years, removing projects from the STIP entirely. I'm probably straying into Laurel's area now. But it's certainly red across the board. So when we look at the program capacity being as low as it is, the Commission has a number of options. We would recommend that you adopt the assumption that is commensurate with that orange dotted line, and in the next item possibly adopt a revised fund estimate based on that assumption. If the Commission chooses some other option, I will go back, well, I don't have to do it. My staff will revise the fund estimate tonight and bring it back tomorrow for your consideration if you choose a different number. Obviously, not just for selfish reasons, but we have put a lot of effort into coming up with that straight line projection, believe it or not. We do recommend that. That's what we recommend the Commission adopt. And if you do so, the numbers I just presented would be the new capacity for the STIP moving forward. So those are your options, and I think Laurel has a recommendation. But before that, maybe you would like to ask questions.
Very good questions. Yes, Mr. Assemi.
Stephen, have you considered another projection, a more flat line? What would happen if you had a flat line revenue?
So flat at what rate would be the question. So I'll tell you this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, gas is all the forecasts that I read is that we have a glut, and we're going to continue to have a glut of gas or oil on the world market for at least through 2020.
Sure. So if you're looking at a flat line at 10 cents per gallon, what does that do? There is no STIP.
Yeah, we should be prepared for that.
We certainly could do that. Again, it's up to the Commission what rates you would like to assume. 10 cent per gallon generates something on the order of $150 million for the STIP annually. I would note in that case, you would not generate enough cash to even fund those projects that you've already allocated in the last 2 years.
That could be a reality.
It could very well be a reality.
Commissioner Inman and then Commissioner Alvarado.
Stephen, thank you. I think, the biggest delta is on this red line the Department of Finance, I think, from 10 to 17 in 1 year. And I know it's not your job to be a salesman, but, you know, I don't know how much confidence level that we really have in that number. I mean, you know, if you had some really big facts to make us think we were going to make that. So what if your orange line, if you took the outlier off and looked, I don't know, it's just hard to feel comfortable with that number when you have that one that is so dramatically different without any real explanation and comfort level, the high probability of getting right there.
So I should note that when I talk about the orange line splitting the difference between all the recommendations, it's not necessarily based on the average of all those recommendations. It's a straight line between 10 cents and 18 cents in 2-cent increments. So the 12 cents is actually on the lower end of that scale.
Okay, so you didn't just take the average of those points?
No, it's not the average of all the projections for next year. And that the reason we didn't do that is twofold. One, the actual sales tax, price-based excise tax rate is based on factors other than just the price of gasoline. It includes over or under collections in prior years, as well as what they think the current year is going to do, plus what they think the future is going to do. It's pretty complicated, and it depends on always having that backward-looking data that we don't even have yet for last year. So we're focusing on just the rate, and we think that straight line is as good a projection as any. Now, that being said, just for your information, each penny of change, I forgot the number, but each penny of change is something on the order of $50 million in allocation capacity,
So it's real money.
program capacity.
Yeah.
I thought every penny generated 145 to 150 million.
It's only 44%.
Oh, it's 44. Okay, got it.
Yeah, it's 44% of the amount left over after the weight fee swap.
Commissioner Alvarado?
Now, the excise tax is the only funding source for STIP, right?
The excise tax does set the level of the STIP. We do sometimes use federal funds for STIP projects, but on a swap basis when it makes the most sense to do so.
Right. So I have a really hard time looking at programming minus $700 and something million. You know, Disneyland was fun when we were kids, but it just doesn't make any sense here. And I think, you know, because, and we may very well pass this negative $740 million STIP, but I think that's our problem. Nobody upstairs knows that this is Disneyland. Jim said it last meeting, there's no more money. There is no money. And so if we pass this, then somebody's going to say, well, the reason we passed it is because there may very well be found money. Well, you're not going to find $740 million with the found money. So I think until we get real and you know, and I'm, believe me, this is not a great time to be coming to chair. When I first came on this commission, my first meeting, Mr. Kempton congratulated us because we spent like $4.5 billion in an hour and a half. That's a shopping spree that anybody's wife can't even duplicate. Or significant other, I guess I should say. I mean, that's a shopping spree. And at that same meeting, I was told, and I think, Jim, you were on it, who served almost a term and had never voted to fund a project. They only defunded projects. Well, because that happened, people got together, the governor's office, the administration, and the legislature supported a bond measure, and out of that came Prop 1B through 1A through E. So we're here now, we're on the other end of that slope, and I think if we don't be responsible and say, Stephen, you have to go back and just give us an honest amount that we're going to have enough money to program for next couple years or 5 years, and that's something that we can shop around. Because right now, people are going to say, oh, well, the STIP's funded, we got projects being brought forward, and, I'm sure people are going to be, in their districts, they're going to be campaigning, the local agencies are going to be doing the best they can, but there's just no money. So I'm having a real hard time with the vote adopting the STIP.
Let me pick up on what you're saying. I think, and I've been talking to Commissioner Simi, if to play it safe, you ought to take 10 cents across the board and see what that looks like. And then you ought to have another chart that says, here's what we need, and here's where it needs to be. So the reality is, it is 10 cents, or it will be 10 cents after they set, and you need to know where that is. And the legislature needs to understand that that's where it's going to be.
That's it.
But here's where it needs to be. So I don't know if, obviously you need a fund estimate, and we've got to come up with something.
Yes, Mr. Kempton.
So, Commissioners, I think that if you look at page 8 and Stephen's chart on amended 2016 STIP fund estimate program capacity, this is the key chart. It's actually doing exactly what you suggested, Commissioner Alvarado. The $754 million is to show the whole that is there based on a comparison with the 2014 STIP that was adopted previously. Now, that's the line, it's like 4 or 5 lines down, 2014 STIP program. This is what you programmed in the 2014 STIP, which ran through 2018-19. That's why you see only 3 numbers on that line. So in 15-16, you had $554 million, going up to $798 million the next year, $682, $673 million. You had $1.2 billion worth of capacity, new capacity, in the 2014 STIP. The previous fund estimate, you had $46 million in capacity, which is the comparison. Now, we don't have any capacity. In fact, it's a negative. So we're not suggesting that we're programming against those negative numbers. What this means is that we have to take projects, we have to delay projects, and we have to take projects out of the STIP to the tune of trying to meet the fact that we don't have $754 million under this new fund estimate. So it's a $754 million hit over what we had thought we might have with respect to our previous fund estimate and the 2014 STIP. It's a terrible situation.
Right, but that's my point. We need to identify those things that are coming out of that $754 million. That's right. Because right now we're carrying them.
And we will have to do that as you adopt the State Transportation Improvement Program, which under a revised schedule is going to be shifted presumably to May. We would normally adopt in March, but we have to allow the regions time to adjust to this revised fund estimate if you approve it tomorrow. And so they will have to have some time, and then we will come back when we adopt the STIP, and it will have $754 million less in project work.
So it's coming back in May.
It's coming back.
Yes, because I think Commissioner Alvarado, they have to figure out locally what they need to delete. Commissioner Madaffer?
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. And I think, I stepped out earlier because I've been doing all this road charge stuff today, and I was talking to the KCBS reporter, and I kind of talked about this was coming up on the agenda, and all of a sudden that wanted to become the story. And I said, yeah, the chickens have come home to roost. I mean, the reality is, you got $800 million they're going to have to somehow or another go away in projects or everything gets stopped. So I guess the question I want to ask whoever, if you're at 10 cents on that chart, what does that mean? If you got a real number of $800 million that it's got to go away, and you're going to come back with a list of projects, what is the real number on your graph that's going to do that? Is it 10 cents?
Well,
That's the orange.
so I'm not sure I understand the question in particular.
The reality is we have to make some cuts,
Yes.
okay? This isn't like Disneyland where it's somehow or another the the money's going to come back. And I think that's the message that's got to, I hate to be, here we are the bearer of bad news, but the reality is, and I think, there's 120 people in the legislature that need to hear this too, the gas tax is not sustainable anymore. This funding mechanism isn't sustainable anymore. We're bolted onto something that started in 1922 that does not work in the 21st century. And until we start figuring that out and recognizing that, this is the new reality for funding transportation in California. And frankly, the rest of the United States, as we heard, Will and I heard at TRB last week. So I just really want to know, let's cut to brass tacks. What is the number, if you're figuring, what's the real number that needs to be cut in order to maintain at least some basic programs without canceling everything?
This
Do
is
you
it.
want to talk about that
This
now?
is the real number.
So if you assume the orange projection for gas prices and revenue from the price-based index, or price-based tax, you would have to remove $754 million worth of projects.
It's the orange line.
Yeah.
That's the orange line assumption.
That's the reality.
Commissioner Medapper, and you probably weren't in the room when all the regional moderators come up and made their presentation. They're very well aware
No, I get it.
of what they need to do over the next couple of months to go back and figure out what projects they need to delete from their programs. And my question to them, to your point, was, have you talked with your local legislators about what you are now facing? Would you please report back to us next month
Perfect.
what
Thank
they're
you.
saying? So I think that's what you're trying to get at, is how do we connect all these dots so that people understand the reality of how difficult this is?
Thank you.
Commissioner Gilmetti,
Yeah.
and then Bobby, do you have
Stephen,
another question?
If we flatline this at 10 cents across the board, what does that $754 million look like?
That's what I was trying to get at.
So I don't have that answer for you. I can certainly generate that fairly quickly. I'll tell you this. That generates.
Oh, I know
Oh,
it's
no, that's
worse.
not just doubled. It's gone. This dip would be gone.
The shortfall is going to be what, 1.6?
The shortfall right now is $801 million less revenue than what we assumed before. If you assume 10 cents per gallon, you basically put us back, let me go back to this graph here. You put us on this left-hand circle graph for the 5-year period, which is $150 million a year. The first 2 years or so, you need all that $150 million just to pay for projects you've already allocated in the last 2 years. You'd be looking, I'm totally guessing, so don't hold me to this, you'd be looking at a step of about $300 million.
Here's what I'd
for
like
5
to-
years.
If we're going to bring this back tomorrow to vote on, and the recommendation right now is the orange line, okay? I would like to see what a flat line of 10 cents across the board looks like. So this commission can look at the orange line, it can look at 10 cents, and make a decision on what they want to do.
We could do that.
Madam Chair, is that acceptable to you?
I'm sorry, Mr. Gilmetti, I was speaking with the executive director. Tell me again.
What I'm asking Stephen and staff to do is to prepare a flat line of 10 cents. So the recommendation is the orange line now. I'd like to see what the 10 cents looks like, and then present that to the commission, and we can make a decision maybe somewhere in between, or agree with the orange line, or whatever, but I'd like to see what the difference is.
Okay, Commissioner Inman?
Well, isn't the real problem 2018 and 19 when we're going to be 1.5 billion? Because there's no programming in 2019, 20, and 2021 is where you net out to the 754. But how are we going to accommodate? It seems to me that the real cut is this 1.5 billion that's cumulative as long as you stay in the red.
Commissioner, what that means is that you have to delete $754 million worth of projects. Then everything that's left has to be spread out over the 5 years. It cannot stay in the year it's programmed.
Okay, so you've got to move it.
So that's what that means. It's basically just, we're front-loaded right now.
But that's an issue where we're having matching funds and
Correct.
leveraging dollars.
It'd be very difficult to delay that many projects, but that's what we would have to do.
Do we know the magnitude? Because these projects are typically blended funding. So it's not just this money, but how many dollars are we going to impact?
We'll know that when they come back.
Right. The
We'll
regions
know
will have
that
to
when
look
they
at that.
come back. Commissioner
Yes.
Art?
So, I think that we need to keep in mind that this is your best crystal ball projection based upon all the different forecasters who crunch these numbers, and it's probably as reasonable as anyone. It's pretty conservative. You're assuming that you're only going to get about a 2-cent increase in the price-based gas excise tax per year over the next, 5 years? So, and then we recalibrate this in 2 years? We do this every 2 years, right?
So you do this in August of each odd-numbered years when the fund estimate is generally adopted.
Right, so every other year, we'll go back and they'll have to recalibrate and see if how far off we were. The districts are going to have to go back based upon whatever we decide and start whacking projects off the list. So I think I agree it's good for a sense of perspective to see what 10 cents looks like. I would hope like heck that it doesn't stay at 10 cents for the next 5 years. If it does, we are in, it's worse than hell. So but I think we need that. And then we can, as a commission, make our best judgment. But whatever we do, we're going to be forcing districts to go back and take real projects off the list. And once they're off the list, it's awfully hard to get them back on. And so, we may be thinking about, well, we should be as conservative and realistic as we can. In 2 years, if things are really bad, we're going to have to go back and they're going to have to cut more.
Right.
But that might not be as draconian as making them cut it all right now.
Right. Executive Director.
Madam Chair, the discussion that went on in the preparation of this recommendation was really, I think, very sober and considerate of a variety of different scenarios. And the fact of the matter is that the orange line is a relative conservative estimate of what's going to happen over the next 5 years. You can see from the chart that has the multiple lines on that some of these other projections are really very, very optimistic. And I think that if we get this information relative to this 10 cents, that's something that we could include in our letter to the legislature saying we've made a reasonable estimate here. We haven't tried to lowball this in order to, convince people that there's a problem. We've tried to make a realistic estimate here for the fund estimate going forward, and it's still a disaster. But with respect to if nothing changes, if that price-based excise tax remains at the rate it is, here's the floor that we could be looking at, and just to take Stephen's words, there would be no state transportation improvement program at that point. So absolutely, if the commission wants to have that information, we can bring that back. But I actually think that this orange line is a reasonable and relatively conservative forecast of what might be available over the next 5 years, unlike some of the more optimistic projections that are included in that multiple graph chart.
Commissioner Kehoe and then Commissioner Gilmedi.
Just a quick question. If Caltrans is bringing back some reconfigured numbers or charts tomorrow, or maybe it's already here, do we know on a county-by-county basis what the capacity funding is like and what the shortfall of the $750 million would result in on a county basis?
Laurel?
I don't actually have that with me, but yes, I can tell you what that is. I have to go back and get it. But I have calculated the 754, by county. It's not particularly helpful because not every county can actually delete. Not everybody actually has current projects, but we can work out that breakdown.
I'd be interested in seeing it.
And Laurel, my understanding too is, for example, if one county has, you've estimated $35 million, for example, in cuts, that doesn't really take into account that leverages other projects. So the cut is actually even deeper.
Correct.
Than what is within our purview. If that makes sense? That may leverage at 2 times $35 million.
Well, and I think another issue, and this was brought up at the RTPA meeting, is this it impacts what they've done in terms of their consistency with their RTPs and sustainable community strategies.
Yes.
So everything that they cut can affect those calculations also.
Correct. Fascinating. Mr. Gilmedi, I'm sorry.
To Director Kempton's comment, I mean, I know we've got to pick something in between, but, you know, every scenario we've looked at here goes up. And I want to remind my fellow commissioners that last year, you know, we started at 18 cents and went down to 12, and now it looks like we're going to 10. There's not one scenario here that goes down, but if you follow the last 2 years, they went down, not up.
I understand. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Frazier.
Could you also provide in that analysis how many jobs lost would this accomplish and what impact would be on the state unemployment insurance programs? I mean, seriously, I mean, we're looking at us not funding jobs creates another state expenditure somewhere else.
So we can certainly provide estimates of the number of jobs. I don't know that I could provide by tomorrow morning an impact on the unemployment insurance.
Very good. All right, commissioners. Laurel, what would you have us do here? We have a recommendation for additional information from Commissioner Gilmetti. Do you wish us to take action today on this or wait until tomorrow?
Well, my recommendation actually is to go ahead and approve the alternative A that the department is recommending. Obviously, if you want to defer, that's your choice, but I would recommend approval.
So we have a recommendation for approval, but also with additional information that Mr. Gilmetti on your...
And Madam Chair,
Yes.
if I could amend Laurel's suggestion, I think it would be helpful to adopt the estimates with the caveat that we are going to provide information relative to the
Flat line.
the flat line, and that would be incorporated in our communication to the legislature in a very prominent place to say this orange line or this projection that we've adopted is a reasonable forecast. However, to Commissioner Gilmetti's points, that the trend is down, and if it stays at this level, here's the implications. And then in addition, the commission has asked for the letter that we would communicate to the legislature to include all of the projects, which is everything in the 2014 STIP, that will either be delayed or deleted, and to, if we can, asterisk those projects where we know there is a leverage factor, which is virtually every single project in the mix, so that the magnitude of this problem can be communicated in stark fashion to the legislature.
What harm does it do to just delay this till tomorrow so we can see what the effect of 10 cents flat looks like? I mean, we might want to pick something in between.
Well, I think, Commissioner, we could do that. There's no question we could do that. We do need to adopt a revised schedule, so we will have to, and we can do that separately.
Actually, I think if we put off the assumption and the fund estimate adoption, we can put the schedule off also, because the schedule is required only if a fund estimate is actually adopted, a revised fund estimate.
Okay.
I just think that, you know, we need to make sure that we can build, from any scenario that the department comes up with, we need to show how that affects the STIP.
So items 19 and 20, Commissioners, could be delayed until tomorrow with the new information that Mr. Keck would bring back relative to the 10-cent flat line. And then you could see what the implications of that are, projection would be, and then we could approve the assumption and then approve the fund estimate and then the revised STIP schedule. Those three items, items 18, 19, and 20, would then carry over to tomorrow.
They could be deferred to tomorrow if you choose.
My question then for Commissioner Gilmetti is, are you thinking that there might possibly be a scenario that we would, as a commission, adopt a flatline recommendation?
No, you might want to see something in between. And I think we just need to look at it and have a discussion about it.
Okay. Okay.
Commissioners, if I may, just for a moment, so we need to actually generate numbers based on a scenario, and 10 cents I will absolutely generate and bring back tomorrow. If you choose something in between the 10 cent and the orange line, for example, I would not be able to present to you those numbers on the spot.
Yeah.
So we could
that's what I'm worried
adopt, you
about.
could maybe take some action to say we adopt a fund estimate with those numbers in it, but I can't do every scenario.
No, I understand
Okay,
that.
then,
How long does it take you to prepare the numbers, out of curiosity?
Well, we are prepared, we've set everything up to put any numbers in that you adopt today, so it won't take us long to do that.
So if we had heard this first thing tomorrow morning, and we decided something in between besides the yellow, the orange line, your favorite color, would you have time to go back and plug some numbers in before we finish our business?
We will do that, yes.
Okay.
Commissioner, but couldn't we not ask him today to prepare the flat line and an in-between scenario for us, as opposed to continuing to defer this?
at least do one halfway in between.
Exactly.
I will do a few and
That
come
would be
back tomorrow.
great.
And I will point out for the commissioner's edification that the blue line down below is kind of what we're talking about with a halfway in between type of thing.
Yes.
That's the existing fund estimate.
Yes.
Adjusted for a 10-cent starting point. So that is the lowest of the 5 projections up there. It would kind of be in between the 10 and the orange line. That number is a $1.3 billion decrease to STIP.
Wow.
And that number, by the way, is included in the briefing package that comes with all the numbers associated with these scenarios.
Can you make the
So-
spreadsheet live so you can do some what-ifs?
We will certainly, I don't know about doing it on the screen, but we'll bring whatever we need to do to get this done tomorrow.
Thank you, Stephen.
Certainly.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we're going to defer action items, let's see, make sure I've got this right, 18, 19, and 20.
Yes.
All right, we're good. Are we good? Commissioner Arp?
Yeah, I really appreciated this discussion. Just one quick editorial comment that, many of you might remember my rather draconian remarks last month at our meeting where I did say there was no money. And what I said at the time, I think actually, unfortunately, is true. Perhaps the best thing you can do in the districts and in the regions, and certainly we can do at this level, is to go back and give the whole cold, hard facts to your people so that they know that we have no money and that without new funding, these projects are going to go away or people aren't going to see them built in their lifetime. That's really what we're looking at. That's the best service we can really offer right now is just tough love. Maybe people will start to wake up and realize that we've got to do something about this. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Arp. Any other comments? All right, we'll put this one to bed. We thank you for coming up with those alternatives for us to look at tomorrow, and we'll take those items up then tomorrow. And I couldn't concur with you more, Mr. Arp. I think that asking our regions to come up and report and tell us what's happening, so it's more than just taking them back and then we don't hear, would be really helpful to our deliberations as well. Okay, moving on now to item number 21, approval of the revised 2016 Aeronautics Account Fund Estimate. An action item, Stephen Mahler and Stephen Keck.
Yes, Commissioners. Normally I'm Mr. Gloom and Doom, but this time I'm going to be Mr. Sunshine. What?
God.
I can't get my arms around.
Sorry.
That's what 2 weeks in Mexico does for you.
That's right. This item is a revised aeronautics fund estimate, and we actually have now more money for you to spend on aeronautics.
Nice.
At the last commission meeting, you approved some new assumptions for the aeronautics account, and we are bringing back the fund estimate with those assumptions implemented. And now we're going to have programming capacity over the next 4 years of close to $4.5 million every year in the aeronautics account. Staff recommends that you approve this sunshine fund estimate for the aeronautics account.
Woo, it's a party. I have a motion by Mr. Gilmetti, a second by Mrs. Inman. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposition? Any abstentions? All right, matter approves. And just because we're on aeronautics, let me report that for my Southern California friends, that the Ontario International Airport Authority has selected a new CEO for the airport, Kelly Friedrichsen out of Rhode Island, 33-year veteran in aviation, to help bring back Ontario Airport to international capacity. So yay team. Okay, so good news, a good news story all the way around. Next up, item number 22, overview of the State Highway Operation Protection Program SHOP and draft of the 2016 SHOP, and information item Stephen Mahler.
Yes, Commissioners. With the passage of SB 486, the Commission has new responsibilities with respect to the SHOP program, starting with an asset management plan and then actual approval and management of SHOP documents, as is done with this STIP document. Bruce Deterre, the department's programming division chief, will provide the Commission with a short overview of the SHOP program and will present the 2016 draft SHOP. Take it away, Bruce.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Commissioners. Boy, I don't ever want to follow Stephen Keck again. He's got you guys in... At least I'm not coming in with any bad news on this. So, you're all familiar with the SHOP, but I'm going to go ahead and do a quick overview of it. The purpose of the SHOP is to maintain, preserve the highway system through rehabilitation and reconstruction of that system. It is our fix-it-first approach to spending and taking care of the highways. Of course, emergencies and safety, which are funded by the SHOP, are our highest priority. This bottom line is very important. The SHOP funds is not a source for expanding the highway system, for adding new lanes. So with the SHOP that we're going to be looking at, the 2016 SHOP, it's 4 years of capital projects. It's fiscally constrained to the 2016 fund estimate, and as you saw from Stephen's presentation, even with the revised fund estimate that you're looking at, that's unlikely to actually affect the SHOP because of its scope of funding. It is aligned with the 2015 SHOP plan that was approved by the Commission last January, so that it's consistent with that. And overall, this 4 years is looking at $9.7 billion in capital projects over the 4 years. And that is why I didn't like to follow Stephen, where you're looking at the $754 million reduction, and I'm talking about that. So within the SHOP, what's new for us this go-round is that the Commission's roles and responsibilities to the SHOP have changed dramatically, particularly with this word adoption. So I kind of think of that as kind of a shared parenthood, where we're creating this child, the SHOP, and you're adopting it, and we're going to go co-parent and deliver this thing and get it up to all the way through high school or something of that nature. So we understand that you're taking that very seriously, and so we're working with your staff to come up with the processes, and we'll hear about that at the next agenda item, for how we're going to work together to accomplish that. This SHOP is also setting the stage for the full implementation of asset management. It's the first year that we're tackling this, and as I'll explain later in the slides, we're going to be talking about the 4 asset classes that the Commission adopted earlier this year, or last year, sorry, I'm thinking fiscal years, for bridge, pavement, culverts, and ITS elements. But the projects you see coming out of the SHOP for this selection won't change dramatically based on those asset classes, because they were under development prior to SB 486 that established this process. So I'll talk through that a little bit more later. It's also expanding, it's looking at the co-benefit kinds of opportunities we have with SHOP projects. As you're aware, the SHOP program used to be fairly siloed, and it did what it did. You either did bridge, or you did pavement, you did a culvert. What we want to look at is, we're out there doing the bridge, the pavement, the culvert. Are there other opportunities to achieve additional state goals, transportation goals? They're definitely related to transportation that we can take advantage of at that time. And examples are complete streets. If we're out doing a pavement project, is there an opportunity to widen the shoulder for complete streets? Advanced mitigation, which is an environmental mitigation approach, where we're looking forward to future needs and trying to take care of it now, so that we have certainty in project delivery in the future. GHG reduction, being consistent with the governor's executive order and state statute. Reduction in water use through SHOP projects in our landscape. And then very importantly, more extensive stakeholder engagement. For a lot of people, the SHOP has been a mystery as to how we come up with the projects, how we deliver them, and make our decision-making. We're, of course, being much more transparent with Commission and also with our partner agencies. So here's kind of a quick time flow for the 10-year shop plan that you adopted in January. We had the fund estimate, which bases on what our funding capacity is. We're going to be presenting you with or delivering the proposed shop by January 31st, which is required in statute. And then by that same statute, SB 486, you're due to adopt that shop on April 1st. The unfortunate part of that is there's not an intervening meeting other than the March meeting where that adoption would take place to have a full conversation about the document you'll be receiving next week. So what we'd propose doing is working very closely with your staff to work through issues so that when we come to the March meeting, we'll have addressed a lot of what would have been certainly the commission staff's concerns. So this is looking at multiple shop cycles from 2014, which is the one we're currently under, that was adopted in 2014 and went through the year 2017. So that was 4 years, 14, 15, 16, 17, and we're in 16 now. So the last 2 years of that shop become the first 2 years of the 2016 shop. So our new programming in 2016 are actually taking place for the last 2 years of the shop in 18, 19. So you can see that. And that new programming is based on the PIDs that were developed in 2014 and 2015. So that has to do where I was talking about affecting the new projects coming in. That work to develop those projects started over the past 2 years, and that work is being used to fund the projects that are going to come in the last 2 years of this shop. So it's a fairly complicated process that goes forward, but it's been repetitive over many shop cycles. And as you see here, it continues all the way through 2020, where you see the full implementation of asset management. So what you're seeing then is that in 2016, the PIDs that we're starting to develop now are very clearly going to be affecting asset management as it's approaching full implementation in 2019 and 2020. And we're very cognizant of that, and we're being very deliberate in helping to scope the projects to achieve those and select the projects. So this is just to give you an idea, because I know in the past people have been upset when they see the draft shop, well, I want different projects. We have to start thinking about that much earlier. So this new process we're going through with the engagement, talking to commission staff enables us to get that kind of action earlier on. So this is what a breakdown of the funding of what you're looking like that we're going to come and propose to you by program categories. So the 4 asset classes, which are 69% of the proposed funding, are again the bridge, pavement, culverts, and ITS elements. We have our collision reduction, which is the safety, which is our most important topic. So you can see that between those things, those asset classes, the collision reduction, and then mandates such as ADHD, stormwater, other kinds of issues that were mandated under statute to do, that takes up the vast majority of the available funding. And we have very little funding available for other things, such as the facilities, the major damage restoration, I'd say as well, that's something that we address within the shop is a very high priority. And I'll show you the figures on that. And so the mobility, where people have talked about auxiliary lanes, doing other kinds of things that can assist with the mobility on that, it's a very small piece of the shop. So with that investment, this is what the kinds of improvements that we would be purchasing over that 4 years, approximately, and these are rough estimates, 4,000 lane miles of pavement that would be rehabilitated, 180 bridges rehabilitated, 720 culverts, and then ITS elements, which are things like message signs, loop detectors, the communication devices for that. We would be replacing 1,600. We've had a lot of them that have been either stolen, where the wires are pulled out, or other reasons that they quit working. So we're going in and fixing those because we need that data so we can better manage the system, and then installing new elements out there. So this is a breakdown by the program areas and the categories, and it's a lot of detail, and we'll go into that in the shop plan to give you some ideas. So that first dollar column that you see, the 4 years of the 2015 plan, that's what in 2015, last January, we looked at that based on our needs assessment, these were kind of the target funding amounts. And so as we put the 2016 shop together and the projects that actually came forward are ready to go, these are the next column over. The 2016 shop shows you the dollar categories of what we're looking at. So we're showing the relative percentage of what we were thinking in January of last year versus the January of what we're going to be bringing forward this year. And there's some discrepancies here when looking at that that you would be good to know about. So the 114% on emergency relief major damage restoration is partly because we get reimbursed after the fact from the federal government, and we have more money that comes in than what was projected in the January of last year's estimate. So as we go through and you see the final one, we'll have more details on that. The reservation at the bottom, these are where we set aside certain amounts of money, such as a reservation for safety, because we know we have to work on safety. We just don't know what the projects are. That total of approximately $1 billion, that's spread among the project categories above. So that's why if you added that column up, it doesn't reach $9.7 billion. You have to take out that reservation amount because that's sprinkled within. But we want to show how much is kind of set aside for unknowns as to what the specific project was going to be when we get there. So this is a relative expenditure. So you can think about this as a great big silver dollar and you're splitting that dollar. So it's the amount of $1 or $100 or $1 billion that gets spent on capital outlay versus capital outlay support. And I know there's some, in looking at that, some things in the capital outlay support that's different from private industry is that the capital outlay support includes the environmental process, it includes construction engineering, things that in a lot of other instances would be included within the capital outlay program. So it would appear to be relatively high to some experience. So our stakeholder engagement, we work primarily through the districts on the engagement on the individual project level and informing and consulting with our partner agencies on what projects will go into the shop and show up. It's not a headquarters-driven communication process. So that kind of engagement was going on through 2015 after we had the 10-year plan approved to work on these are the projects that we're going to be proposing forward. The draft project list was posted on November 9th with comments due to us by December 15th for review by whomever was looking at that. We had a lot of people, a lot of inquiries on that. We got 13 public agencies that submitted written comments. We had a lot of people calling and asking us questions we went back and forth with, and we will be addressing those comments. We didn't have any fatal flaws within the shop from those. Mostly we had comments asking us to address specific projects, talking about supporting a project that we have, or just talking about the importance of spending the shop revenue. And there were some that were asking for projects that we haven't yet figured out how to fund. And so those are addressed in the document, and copies of all the comment letters are included as well. So this is quite a variation from the last time when we had one comment letter that was submitted to the department. It actually wasn't a letter, it was just an email for the 2014 shop. So 13 doesn't seem like a lot, but relatively speaking it is, and we'll do more engagement for the next go-round. So our next actions, we will be providing the proposed document to you for your consideration and adoption. And again, we'll work with commissioners to respond to the commission staff to address issues on that. The adopting the shop or taking other action. You may choose to do something different than adopt it, but the 486 does require its submittal to the legislature and the governor by April 1st. So working within those paradigms. And then not shown here is that we immediately began working on the preparation of the 2017 10-year shop plan that would be coming back here next January for your approval that would lead to the 2018 shop. So this cycle moves along fairly quickly, and we're responsive to the conditions of both the system and the financial situation. So I'd be happy to take any questions you may have. And I do want to say that we have loaned our in-house expert to the commission for the past couple of months and all the way through the end of this fiscal year, Rick Gavell. He was our shop program manager up until recently. Well, he still is, but he's on loan, so.
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you, Rick, very much for your work. Commissioner Gilmetti?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bruce, can you just give me a rough idea of what's included in capital outlay support? We've got 27% of the...
So capital outlay support are all the activities it takes to put together the project, to deliver it. So starting with the capital program from the environmental phase all the way through all the Caltrans staff that are working on that and then managing the project once it gets out in the field. So the capital outlay would be basically that.
So there's no maintenance in here? None of the maintenance guys are in this number?
The shop program does not fund the maintenance program. That's separately funded. So in something that was mentioned earlier about the rehabilitation, and in my first slide on this, I talked about reconstruction. that eventually, essentially all of our facilities at some point have to be reconstructed no matter how well you maintain them. The materials just become brittle or something happens with it. We
And
have to
that's
go
out of
back
the
and
SHOP
rebuild.
program.
And that comes out of the SHOP program.
Thank you.
Yes.
So the capital outlay support is environmental design, right-of-way, construction oversight, and project management.
Thank you. Commissioner Inman?
Bruce, on page 9, roadway preservation is the only item that we have. 2016 has a smaller number than the 2015, and
Yes.
I don't know what roads you all
and
are
that
on.
is that's our pavement program. So we have a lot of pavement projects where we're doing the development work, but not yet accounting for the capital spending.
So
on
that's
that.
more of a planning thing? I mean, because we need,
It's getting ready for available funding without having that capital funding there yet.
because the need's still there.
The needs far exceed the available funding. So the earlier reference to that $57 billion 10-year shortage, so this $2.3 billion a year that we're proposing, and it's actually $2.3 billion this year, and then the following 3 years it goes up to $2.4 billion each of those years. And then we have that federal reimbursement for the emergency work that flows into this as well. So it's making
So if
room
it's
for that.
emergency, then Vince will pay for it? That's good.
Yes, they're very good at that. We're incredibly adept at working with them and securing those federal funds.
Very good. Any other questions, comments? Thank you again, Bruce. Appreciate your report. And we'll take this up at another time, I can see, on the schedule. Item number 23, approval of amendments to Resolution G12. Stephen Muller, an action item.
Yes, Commissioners, just to remind you, your Resolution G12 is the resolution under which the department manages right now capital for projects. Your resolution sets out certain bounds within which the department manages the projects, and if they get out beyond those bounds, they come and visit the commission, like on supplemental votes. Now, with the parenthood that we are acquiring through the SB 486, we are also now going to be becoming involved in the support side of projects. So we need to amend the G12 resolution to not only address the capital side, but also the support side. So staff has prepared this item. In the book item, you will have the original G12 resolution with bold and strikeout for the revisions. I have also met with the department yesterday, where the department had some trepidations about this, but with anything that's new, there's always trepidation, and I assured them that as they put together their points of engagements of how they're going to manage stuff, because this G12 resolution is just a skeleton and they need to put the meat on the bones, that as we go through this process, I'll be more than glad to come back and make changes to the G12 resolutions as they're necessary to overcome any problems or glitches that we encounter as we grow into this. Having said that, I would recommend that the Commission approve the revised G12 resolution.
Move Mr. Sunshine's approval.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gilmetti, a second by Mr. Madaffer. Any discussion? All those in favor of
Aye.
the recommendation? Aye. Any opposition? All those abstaining? It has been approved. Thank you very much, Stephen. Next up, item number 24, consideration of draft toll facility guidelines, AB 194. Eric Thronson, an information item.
Thank you, Commissioners. As you're all, I'm sure, aware, last fall, AB 194 by Mr. Frazier was passed and signed into law, which essentially transfers the responsibility to approve tolling in the state from the legislature to the Commission. This part of that responsibility requires that the Commission adopt guidelines related to this newly delegated authority. So we have staff has brought forward some draft guidelines after going through a long process working with both legislative staff to understand legislative intent from AB 194, working with Caltrans as a potential applicant, as well as regional stakeholders, the other potential applicants. We have worked very hard to try to come to a compromise. One of the challenges with this bill for the commission, inherent in the work that this is going to require, is that it is putting the commission in some ways between the administration and the regional transportation agencies. To some extent, the commission does very well in this kind of position, but it also can create challenges. And so staff has worked very hard to try to be flexible, to create flexibility within these guidelines and the draft that there is, but there is room for plenty of comment and consideration as we propose these draft guidelines in this meeting and final adoption of guidelines for the March meeting. We were just hoping to present these at the meeting today to give the opportunity for commissioners and stakeholders, anyone to weigh in with comments. We can then attempt to address between now and March. Before we go any further, there is one item that the staff would like to suggest, one amendment to the guidelines that we'd like to suggest from the outset that snuck by us when we were working on these. There were a lot of iterations, and I think that there is room for improvement throughout. But on page 6 of the draft guidelines, toward the top, under community and stakeholder support, the last sentence of that paragraph, which is asking whether all affected local jurisdictions have provided clear written statements of the extent of their support for the project, seems a little overkill for the approval necessary for the CTC to approve an application, and therefore we would recommend just taking that sentence out of the guidelines. Beyond that, this is just an item for information, and so we just want to create the opportunity for comments if there are any.
Very good, thank you. I notice we have one speaker, Darrell Johnson, Orange County Transportation Authority. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. In an effort to streamline your meeting today, which I know is going a little bit long, I'm going to try to talk from a perspective of the Orange County Transportation Authority as well as on behalf of the Self-Help Counties Coalition. We've tried to not have 20 people come up and give you their opinion of these, so I will try to encompass both of these comments in one. You did receive a letter, I think it was passed out to you just a moment ago. Those would be our written comments specifically from the Orange County Transportation Authority. I would start today, I want to just thank Assembly Member and Chairman Frazier for his hard work on a very difficult and challenging issue. Thank you for your leadership. It was something that all of us in the state of California needed and has been long overdue to have a clear set of roles and responsibilities on this particular issue. And then second, to thank the CTC staff. As your staff just indicated, they have worked diligently with the stakeholders to ensure that all of the aspects of this have come in, and we couldn't be more pleased with their availability than their willingness to discuss the issues. As you know, I'm going to talk about OCTA for just a moment. We're working very quickly and rapidly on a large-scale project in Orange County on Interstate 405. It will be a $1.7 billion toll facility between Costa Mesa and Long Beach. It is, for all practical purposes, funded entirely with local sales tax measure and toll revenue bonds. And we are past the environmental clearance stage. We are underway to develop a design build procurement, which is underway today. And we hope to be under construction by this time next year. And so moving very rapidly on that. The project has a number of features in it, including significant mobility improvements within the region, significant time savings, done in a way that limits right-of-way impacts, and has many, many options for commuters. There are other self-help counties that have other projects just as important as that, whether it's the I-15 in Riverside, projects planned in San Bernardino, and projects planned in the Bay Area. They will all take advantage of this significant groundbreaking legislation. So with that, we hope to see, as part of the Self-Help Counties Coalition, that the guidelines are implemented in a manner that allows for a streamlined application process so things can move quickly, the rules are understood consistently, and that it's consistent with what I think the intent of AB 194 was, which was to prevent delays and allow for flexibility. These projects are very, very complex by their nature with a tolling component to them, and the flexibility on the financing and the delivery is critical. In order to ensure our project in Orange County is implemented on time, we would ask to come before the Commission in May and ask for final approval from you for our project so we could implement the Express Lanes facility. So we would like you to, we're very happy that the guidelines are here today in draft form, and we'd be very happy to see the final guidelines adopted in March. With that said, we think there's multiple features that are really, really good in your guidelines. The first one in particular, that while you recognize that a complete funding plan is required for your approval, an agency like OCTA or any of the self-help counties is not going to have all of their financing secured until you are ready to award that project. These projects by their nature have very complex funding, whether it's sales tax backed bond, toll revenue backed bond, a TIFIA loan, or other private investment. So that sometimes leads to the very end. So we appreciate your understanding of that. The proposed schedule, we think is very aggressive in a good manner. Getting a bill that was signed by the governor late last fall and in front of you here in January today with guidelines for implementation, we applaud you for that. A couple of areas that we would suggest that could be streamlined from a regional agency perspective is to try to do everything you possibly can to streamline the the application process. So the guidelines indicate that perhaps there's 2 steps involved. I would suggest that for projects that are well developed, you can do that in 1 step and save the commission staff time, save the regional agency time, and therefore also save time and money on all parties involved. The item that was just suggested by your staff about deletion, we would be entirely supportive of that. Projects like our project in Orange County have been through 3 to 4 years of environmental review, 200 public meetings, and we have an approved environmental document by the Federal Highway Administration and the Department of Transportation. We think that shows sufficient support in terms of how that project was approved. Also, the expenditure plan, it's really important that as the regional agency is the sponsor, that expenditure plan does have complete control by the regional board that adopts that expenditure plan. Some concern from the Self-Help Counties Coalition that there's an intent for us to tell you in advance what the use of excess revenues shall be. And one of our concerns would be that until your financing plan is known, until your toll policy is adopted, you may not even have any excess revenue. So the idea of having, through the application process, having to provide the intent of those excess revenues so early may be premature in the process. Flexibility is important. As I mentioned a moment ago, we are before you very soon with a fully approved environmental document with right-of-way acquisition underway and construction right around the corner. You are going to see many applications from the self-help counties and the regional agencies that are in very different stages of their life cycle. So being able to have flexibility in when the agency comes before you as a commission and seeks your approval, it may be very, very early on in the process or very late in the process, depending upon where that agency's at. And it's important there because one of the things in your guidelines and in the bill is demonstrating cooperation with Caltrans. We all want to demonstrate cooperation with Caltrans, but where you're at in the life cycle development of a project, you may have different ways to develop that. So that flexibility we think is critical. And then finally, we're very happy to see that the CTC will get their staff time reimbursed for reviewing applications. We just want to make sure that there's a process to come to early agreement on that so we know what our cost is going forward early in the process so that can be built into the project cost. And some concern about the indirect cost. Indirect costs are always a concern to all parties. If you don't know what those are up front, they can run out of control, and we would just ask that we make sure we know what those indirect costs are up front. I'll close by saying that I've covered a lot of ground very quickly. We'd be happy to answer any questions from the coalition or from OCTA, but I would commend you again, Mr. Frazier, with your leadership and how quickly the commission staff has been able to bring this forward for your consideration today, and we look forward to a final adoption of your guidelines in March. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Questions or comments for Mr. Johnson? I see no other public speakers. Any comments? Yes, Mr. Frazier.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just also want to thank the CTC staff for, wow, after the governor's signature and getting this to us in such a timely manner. You guys rock. Seriously, this is something that's unprecedented, and you value the importance of what self-help counties do for our state. And I really do appreciate the partnership and the collaboration. I do have to ask that the commission recognize the self-help counties as the sponsor of this bill for wanting to put this investment into the system. And the hard work that they did, and Keith Dunn, the lobbyist who I worked with, who brought me to Mobility 21 to meet with all the stakeholders, and how imperative this was for them to be effective and be able to fund and bond their projects. So again, I just want to thank the commission for their consideration, but also the staff for making this happen in such a timely manner.
And thank you, Mr. Frazier. A really important project for Orange County. Really appreciate your leadership and Darrell Johnson's leadership. Outstanding work by OCTA and as well Caltrans District 12 working on this one. Really tough one. Really tough one. Anything else then on this one? Information item only. So, Mr. Kempton, do you want to add anything else? Are we good?
We are good, Madam
Okay.
Chair, so we can move on to the information calendar.
We have one more item, number 25, report on the traffic congestion relief program. Laurel Johnson, information item.
Yes, this is an information item, although it's not on the information calendar. This is the annual report of the Traffic Congestion Relief Program. This is being kind of highlighted at this time, partly because of what Stephen had said earlier. The governor has included in his proposed budget $148 million that would go toward allocations to Tier 2. As you know, we have a Tier 1. We've been making allocations to those projects every year, and we have several projects below that that have not been receiving allocations. So this annual report just gives you an update on where the program is now, and I think it's important to remember that if we do get additional funding to go towards some of these Tier 2 projects that have program dollars, many of them have actually gone forward and done their projects, we'll need to come back with some plan on how to go about allocating those funds in the future. But basically, this is the annual report. We see this every year. It tells you where we are right now with this program. If you have any questions, we can attempt to answer those.
Great. Any questions for Laurel? Thank you very much, Laurel. And so we'll move on now to our information calendar, item number 26. Stephen.
Yes, Commissioners, the next 6 items, 26 through 31, are the information calendar. These items, in staff's opinion, don't raise any issues. The individual reports will not be presented unless specifically requested by a commissioner.
Very good. Any questions, commissioners? Very good. Fine. We move on to our consent calendar. Again, Stephen, number 32.
Yes, Commissioners, the next 12 agenda items, 32 through 43, are consent calendar items. The following changes need to be noted before you vote on this calendar. Under item 40, the resolutions of necessity, the following resolutions are being pulled off of the agenda. C 21403, C 21404, C 21405, and C 21419. Under agenda item 41, Director's Deeds, item number 6, deed number 6 is also being removed from the agenda. Under item 42, the actual allocation amount and program amount are less by $200. With these changes, staff recommends that you approve the consent calendar.
Move that we consent.
We've got a consent to the consent by Mr. Arp, a second by Mr. Assemi. Any more discussion? All those in favor? Any opposition? Any abstention? Matter with those amendments by Stephen Mahler has been approved. Okay, I think we have one more, item 44, an environmental matter, approval of a project for future consideration of funding. This is an action item. Jose Asegura.
Yes, good afternoon, Commissioners, Madam Chair. Item 44 is an action item. This is the final environmental impact report for the City of Roseville Class 1 Trail Project in Placer County. The environmental impact report had significant and unavoidable impacts related to land use, community, traffic and pedestrian facilities, emergency services, visual and aesthetics, cultural and air quality and biological resources. The Roseville City Council adopted a statement of overriding considerations, finding that the benefits of the project outweigh the impacts. Staff recommends your approval.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposition? Any abstention? Thank you very much. Matter is approved. All right. Are there any other items, Mr. Executive Director?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to thank everybody for the very kind comments today following my announcement that I will be leaving at the end of March. I did not get to tell folks that with respect to the schedule for the selection of a permanent executive director, The position will actually be advertised effective Friday, and applications will be due by February 4th. And then the commission has a process. They'll go through a review, and actually the intent is to have an executive director selected and in place prior to the end of March. So I wanted to get those dates out there so everybody has that information. And then if I may just beg the indulgence of the commission to tell one brief story on Commissioner Madaffer. Actually, there's two comments that people should know about Commissioner Madaffer. In Washington, he was hanging around with the wrong people at a particular social event. And when he got there, he took his jacket off and placed it at the table and proceeded to go around the room to schmooze. And his jacket caught on fire. So he is now engaged. He's now engaged in litigation with Morton's Steakhouse in Washington, D.C. For the replacement of his jacket. I tried to tell him that if he was hanging out in a better place with better people, there wouldn't have been any problem whatsoever. Also, in the course of the discussion, I had to spend a lot of time with Commissioner Madaffer, and of course, he brought, as he often does, the discussion around to his car. Now, we all know that Commissioner Madaffer is not paying his fair share for his use of the road because he drives a Tesla, and so does his wife.
Exactly.
And so my wife has blessed me with a new car for my retirement, and that happens to be a 2015 Corvette Stingray. So I will be paying what Madaffer isn't paying in terms of the gas, but he's always bragging about his car and how it's better than a Corvette and how it, I mean, have you seen them? Have you seen the new Vets? Nobody would agree that it looks better than a 2015 Corvette. But in any
I cannot believe he has started this.
In any event, so he is telling me how the Tesla can outperform a Corvette. And so he's Mr. Technology, and so he immediately says, I'll show you. And he proceeds to Google information. The first article that comes up is entitled, Corvette Stingray Crushes Tesla. And there is a video as proof, a race that they had, and the Corvette blew the Tesla away. I rest my case.
I'm disappointed.
I didn't tell him that was a spoof website, but I didn't want to burst his bubble.
But grudge it out.
You know, there's nothing quite like men and their toys, right? And I've really enjoyed being chair this year, so
Hey,
really appreciate it.
the new Corvette redefines active transportation.
But it's still recreational, Jim. I'm sorry. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will begin at 9 o'clock sharp tomorrow, and once again take up our fund estimates and the remainder of the agenda. And I will adjourn until then. Thank you.